Hello and welcome to the Roundtable Podcast. I am Shogun. Tonight we have one of our member interview series with the legendary Archduke Ralph, a good friend of mine, a wonderful person indeed, with some pretty profound ideas. We actually did a podcast before and the recording was tragically lost. So this will be pass number 2 on some of these topics, but sometimes that's for the best. Before we get into it, please do follow our podcast on YouTube and on BitChute. You can find links to all of that and more on the Roundtable Discord server. All you have to do is Google Roundtable Discord and you'll find us, or look at politics or conspiracy theories on Discord. You'll find us there as well. Thank you to the live audience for joining us today, and thank you to Archduke Ralph. How are you today, sir?
I'm not doing too bad. All things considered, it's another day in paradise.
Amen to that. It ain't perfect, but we're glad to have it for the time being. So I got to tell you, Ralph, I mean, I've lost quite a few podcasts. We've recorded hundreds and we've lost quite a few. But losing yours was a real kick in the nuts because that was a pretty great fucking conversation we had. But quite a few people were there. I think about 25 people were live. But sometimes doing it as a second pass is good because your mind has had a chance to process some things and you can give it another take. So why don't we start with the terrestrial, and then we'll evolve into the spiritual matters as we go. So I thought it was interesting to talk about your experience working with Ron Paul. Because when I was in high school, Ron Paul was running for president, and I remember at the time there was a real feeling that if he could be elected, it would like really make a difference, right? And I can't remember that feeling being really present. I guess with Obama, some people had it, rightly or wrongly. But just tell us, how did you get involved with the Ron Paul campaign, and why?
Well, I want to take it to square one on this question, really kind of start from the beginning. And help you understand how I kind of arrived at the outlook that I have that led me to Ron Paul. Let's see, probably about 13 years ago or so, give or take, around 2006, 2007, I had already kind of been into the conspiracy stuff for a year or two and had come across Alex Jones and I'm not a huge fan of his anymore. Haven't been for a long time, but I have to give him credit for a lot of his work and kind of getting me to look at some things that I had never looked at before. And one of the people that he talked about a lot was Ron Paul. And so I found out who Ron Paul was. I think it was about 2 months before he entered the 2008 race. And by the way, it's kind of funny, with both of the elections in 2008 and 2012, Ron Paul did not actually file the paperwork himself. In fact, he found out that he was running for president both times when he saw it on CNN go across the ticker on the bottom of the screen. And so, some of his subordinates who worked for him were the ones that put his hat in the ring both times. And he's such a nice guy. I mean, if you actually know him at all, the more you get to know him, he's really just a very laid back, genuine person. He doesn't seek power, which is part of what makes him so well qualified. But he kind of got dragged into it, more or less. But anyway, so in the 2008 campaign, I spent a lot of my own money buying yard signs. I had signs on the roadsides. I spent several $100s covering 2 different counties here, the one I live in and the one next to me. I donated about $100 a month to his campaign. I was there when his blimp launched because the hangar where his blimp was launched from is about an hour away from my house, so I was lucky enough to be there for that. He had his own blimp in 2008. So, fast forward to 2012, I was marching in parades, waving flags and signs and handing out literature, buying boxes full of literature to help get the word out. And, just as a little caveat, I never really believed that he could actually win. I mean, honestly, somebody like him, they're never going to let near the Oval Office. But getting the message out there, getting people to realize what freedom really means and understand the principles of freedom, and what it's based on is, I think, the real goal, and I think we really accomplished that to a large degree. But yeah, so anyway, I got on board with the Ron Paul campaign. Somebody that worked for him was kind of lobbying me to join, and I didn't really take him seriously at first, but after a few months, he was persistent, and I said, sure, yeah, I'm interested. And a few days later, I was on the plane to go about 1,500 miles away from my home. The state that I worked in, I was assistant state director, and I was also the regional director for the congressional districts in the outstate, the perimeter of the state, out in the countryside. And so I put about 30,000 miles on a rental car in less than 6 months. I had to go around and train people how to caucus. And using the caucus system, we were able to get ultimately 33 of the 40 national delegates that were being sent to the Republican convention from that state. So we did better in that state than any other state. And they've actually since changed the laws. So the delegates are bound. They no longer have the ability to vote their conscience, as a direct result of our successes there, to try to keep any similar dark horse style candidates from getting a foothold in the future. But any of you, I encourage you to check out Constitution Class by Michael Badnerick. It's available on YouTube, and I'll put a link in the podcast channel here before I leave tonight. But that's a really good primer on what the Constitution was aiming at, why it was worded the way it was, and helps people understand why it's so misunderstood and misapplied today. But with Ron Paul, I'm a very strong believer in, I could deal with no government, but I concede that people are not generally ready for no government, but the less government we can have, the better, in my opinion. And the Constitution, as it's strictly written, is pretty close to that. It does have flaws. It's not perfect, but it is the law. And understanding, I think the intent there is very helpful to understanding what freedom's about. But anyway, without going into too much detail there, I made a lot of friends working for Ron Paul. It's actually how I met my wife. We are separated now, unfortunately, but we had 7 great years together, and she was a campaign volunteer. That's how I met her. So, Ron Paul always said freedom brings people together, and it was certainly true in our case. But it's going to be hard to ever find. I'm never going to have somebody to work for that I like anywhere near as much as I like him. He's kind of, it's hard to describe, but when you really believe in that kind of thing and you start to understand that he was the guy who was in Congress for over 24 years altogether, and he held the line and voted no on almost every bill, since the Constitution didn't give Congress the authority to pass all these crazy laws they were trying to pass. It's really respectable, and he's also the reason that so many people are aware of the Fed. We talk about the Federal Reserve a lot on this server, and there is no one person who's been involved in the United States government at any point that has brought as much attention to the Federal Reserve and the fact that we need to reform the way that this private central bank interacts with our government than Ron Paul. So if nothing else, he deserves credit for that, even if you disagree with him on a lot of issues. So, and the Fed.
Right, I agree with that. Before we move beyond politics, what's your take on the current political spectrum? There's no candidate like Ron Paul that you can just unambiguously support. So how do you look at the current situation now?
That's a good question, especially, so I tell people I'm retired from political consulting. I worked for one other national campaign after I worked for Ron Paul, and that one did not go as well because the candidate was almost right there with Ron Paul and what he believed, but he watered down what he believed when he would give speeches and interviews and things because he was scared it might hurt his chances of election. This guy was running for U.S. Senate. And the funny thing is there was really no way he could get elected either. I mean, he was a great candidate, but the problem was that the incumbent that he was running against, and this is a blue state, mind you, is extremely popular. And she ended up beating him. She had like over 65% of the vote when it came to the general election. And so, you know, I'm kind of disappointed in him. I don't want to name names, you know, because I like him as a person, but I was disappointed that he ran away from what he knew to be the correct principles because he thought it might help him get elected. I think that's the wrong direction to go. I think you need to take the opportunity to tell it like it is. But yeah, as far as the current election, I try not to be engaged in politics anymore. It really disgusts me, actually. You know, I won't vote. I mean, it would take a lot to get me to actually go to a polling place and vote again, because I see politics as just a great farce, an illusion of choice. We really don't have a choice. The difference between, you know, the major party candidates is going to be very marginal. And, you know, people who say you don't have a right to bitch if you don't vote, I think you misunderstand the power of, you know, you can vote. I can vote, but I'm going to vote none of the above. So yeah, my vote is none of the above. So, you know, I actually do have a right to bitch. I can bitch all I want to. Just because I didn't choose one, you know, a turd or a douchebag doesn't mean I don't get to bitch about it. But I don't really bitch too much because it doesn't do any good. You know, like I said, I really don't see a huge difference because America is still going to project itself into the world as an empire. It's still going to run domestic, you know, drug war that invades people's personal privacy and liberties. They're still going to, you know, they're still going to curtail our freedom of speech, and with things like the nonprofit organization law that Lyndon Johnson pushed into law there. You know, people don't realize, but that basically gives them the ability to tell churches they can't, and other organizations that are nonprofit, that they can't have public political opinions. So that's actually undermining their freedom of speech, you know. And so, yeah, I mean, I don't have a choice in the race. You know, I basically see Republicans and Democrats as all far too liberal, and I got to give Democrats and liberals credit for at least, you know, owning up to the fact they're liberal. But Republicans are liberal too, you know, especially when it comes to foreign policy and telling people what they can and can't do in their bedrooms and in their personal lives. They tend to be the ones that favor the drug war the most, that worship police the most. And, you know, the vast majority of the laws that police are enforcing are unconstitutional and interfere with our personal liberty. And so across the board, you know, it's a disgusting situation. And most countries are this way. I mean, it doesn't matter if you've got two parties or 20 different political parties. They're usually fighting over what flavor of control they want to shove down everyone's throat. And it's really rare to find candidates such as Ron Paul, for instance, who are saying, no, the proper role of government is to protect our liberty. And so, yeah, I don't have a horse in this race.
Understood. So the name of this podcast has to do with the meaning of life and spirituality as well. So let's move from the political to the spiritual arena. You and I share similar sort of spiritual beliefs. I'm trying to think of how to open this up. Like, what are your spiritual beliefs, and how did you come to hold them, I suppose, is really the question.
Well, you know, I was raised in a Southern Baptist church that my parents helped to found. And I don't know if any of you are familiar with it, but, you know, the Southern Baptist Convention was formed in the 1800s. They actually, before that, they were all Baptist, but the split between Northern and Southern Baptists back then came over the issue of slavery. The Southern Baptists thought that slavery should continue to be allowed. Then in the 1900s, the next split that happened occurred over whether or not they should allow black people to be a part of the convention. So that's not a very good history for them. And they're the second most popular Christian denomination in the United States, second only to Catholicism, Roman Catholicism. And so, you know, the more you get to know me, the more you could probably understand why this is not a way of life that really jives with me. Being told to obey for the sake of obedience, being told that I don't believe in eternal torture, held over your head unless you subscribe to this certain, really, it's to me the idea of a loving God that would allow his own son to be put to death. First of all, what loving God wants people sacrificed in the first place? I mean, Jesus was a blood sacrifice, right? According to the fundamentalist Christianity, and it's a ransom paid against all our sins. But what loving God would be holding us for ransom in the first place? I mean, this is an idea which I think is very upside down. I think it's a way for people to excuse terrible actions. I think that, male patriarchy has been, dominating the world's major Western religions and Judeo-Christian beliefs ever since the beginning. The female is to be subordinate, to obey the male, and God is seen as a male. And, all these sorts of ideas just, the more I pay attention to the world around me, and I'm a very spiritual person, and I feel like I'm very in touch with my surroundings and with whatever creative force there is in the universe. And I really try to pay attention. And it all really just stinks of male patriarchy and trying to get people to follow a system that supports, it's like a pyramid scheme, really. I mean, the Catholic Church is a good example. No other entity on earth possesses as much wealth as the Catholic Church, and all the other Christian denominations, with very tiny exceptions, they really march in step with the Catholic Church without realizing it. For instance, with Sunday worship, the Catholic Church is the one that moved the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday. And they actually openly said when they did so that it was their mark of authority. And, ever since, they've basically been snickering into their sleeve, more or less, over the fact that all these Protestants still follow that mark of authority by worshiping on Sunday, with a few exceptions like Seventh-day Adventists. Jehovah's Witness is another example, I believe. But, I'm a pretty open-minded person, and I don't accept what I'm told without thorough investigation and critical thought. And the older I got, the less any of it made sense to me. So when I was about 22 years old, fast forward to then, I had gotten to a point in my life where I was struggling some with depression, and feelings of lack of self-worth and whatnot. And a friend of mine suggested a book to me called The Power of Now by Eckhart Tolle. And I read the book, and no nonfiction book has affected me the way this book has in my life. No book at all, really. But the idea of the book is basically that, our thinking is what gets between us and peace. And, this kind of, it's like a lot like what the Buddha talks about. And this book references Buddha, references Jesus, and all these different faiths. And it points out that, all these different teachings around the world are saying this. But these ideas are being kind of covered up or glossed over by certain tenets, which, try to emphasize other things like redemption from sin. Actually, I've got a really good friend named Rabbi Yossi, and he knows ancient Hebrew, and he's translated the ancient Hebrew texts into modern English using his understanding. And he claims, and many others do claim as well, that the word sin, as it's used in the Bible, doesn't mean doing something bad. It means a lack of understanding. And so I can jive with that much better, because I believe that when people do things that are bad things, more or less, to each other and to themselves, it's because they don't realize the consequences of their actions. they don't understand that what they're doing is basically hindering the spiritual evolution that is to take place and will happen anyway. And so, that kind of feeds into what my spiritual views are, because I believe in reincarnation. I believe that everything's divine. There's no such thing as the mundane. And every part of creation is sacred. And I believe that. I believe in multiverses. I believe in more than one universe. I believe that every time we make a choice, we create a new universe, and that choice takes us into that universe, and that there's almost infinite universes. And I believe that by doing that, we create existence. So we are creators. The idea that God is some other force that's away from us that we're at the mercy of is not something I believe. I believe the opposite. I believe that God works through us, that whatever creative force there is in the universe works through us, and that creation happens through us. And not just us as in humans. Our consciousness, our spiritual consciousness, is not something that only belongs to us. It belongs to other animals as well, and inanimate objects as well. Everything is based on consciousness. There's a spiritual blueprint that is the real reality, that what we experience is only a manifestation of. And so what you see when you look around you, this what appears to be three-dimensional solid creation, is a manifestation of the spiritual blueprint that is really at its core. And so each of us has a spiritual blueprint. Each of us has a higher self. Everything has a higher self, and they're all connected like a tree, like branches on a tree. And that's the way I view spirituality. The Native Americans talk about the web of life, and how everything is connected. They seem to understand that. And they're not the only ones that looked at things that way. The Hindu religion, I can relate very well with their spiritual evolution that they see happening through their religion. They believe that through many lifetimes we are purifying ourselves and spiritually evolving to become more spiritually powerful. And I believe we're actually recognizing and remembering what we truly are. It's kind of like, if you'll forgive it, and I'm sure you've heard the idea, but it's almost like we're all playing a game. So reality reality mimics this blueprint. So the blueprint exists, and then we do things within our reality that mimics what's in the blueprint and how we came to be here. And I believe that video games and just games in general are a great example of this, because we came here as a way to experience and play and create, right? And to just see what happens and where the cards fall. And so we logged into this creation. We chose to do so. But the big difference between when you and I might do it on a video game and what we did when we came here is that we don't remember the place we came from. And it makes this that much more real. It makes the experience that much more poignant, because we don't remember the divine side. We have to remember it. We remember it more and more if we open ourselves up to it. It's there. If you pay attention, like synchronicities everywhere. The more I look for it, the more I see it. So sometimes, it's gotten to the point in my life where synchronicity doesn't blow my mind the way it did when I first started looking for it. In fact, now it's expected. When it happens, I very quickly say to myself, yep, of course that happened. Why wouldn't that happen? Why wouldn't all these numbers line up? Why wouldn't, it's really hard to provide examples, but when you're in that moment and you're looking for it and you find it, without a shadow of a doubt that it's not accidental. It's not just quote unquote coincidence, as so many people try to write these things off as. And so, so I talked a little bit last time about a really good example I try to use is Adolf Hitler. So it's really helpful to look at him as a case study when you're talking about this worldview. Like, well, how could someone like that exist? But, So the way I look at it is he was very ambitious with the different potential lives that he chose for himself before he came into the body. But because there's such an ambitious potential for good, there's also a potential for bad. And in the reality that we're in right now, the one that he did all the terrible things he did in, he did not fulfill his highest potential by any stretch of the imagination. And what's really counterintuitive, or goes against kind of what you've been taught, is the understanding that it doesn't mean it's okay what he did. When I say all this, I'm not trying to say that all the terrible things he did are good or but they are helpful. They're helpful because the darkness exists as a way for us to all grow. It's there to teach us how not to behave. So it's an example of how not to behave, right? And so even in his failure to live up to his life's potential, he provided a powerful example of how people should not live. And so it's not to be celebrated, it is to be condemned. But no one, including Adolf Hitler, is beyond forgiveness. We all should forgive each other for our shortcomings, and he's an extreme example, right? But if you really believe in forgiveness, and see, I thought about this many times, not just with Adolf Hitler, but just with, in general, people do terrible things. How can you forgive people for doing the most terrible things? But if you really believe in forgiveness, that's what it means. And it's not about just forgiving someone for forgetting your birthday, or somebody for scratching your car with a key. These little things. This is like, if you really believe in forgiveness, as is taught by the Christian Bible and many other religions, then you have to be able to apply it to even the most terrible humans that have ever existed. And just like Christ said on the cross to his companion that was next to him, he said, forgive them, for they know, or he said he said it to Father God, but he said, forgive them, for they know not what they do. And they don't know what they're doing. And that's when you start to apply these metaphysical perspectives, it really starts to lock in place. So I selected for the photo to post along with this again this week, the Metatron's cube. And Metatron is an angel in the Hebrew text. He isn't talked about in the Christian Bible, which the Hebrew text is initially based on. Many other things are left out. Metatron, the angel Metatron, I believe, is so important to study the meaning and the ideas about Metatron, because it helps you to, from my worldview. So let me explain a little about Metatron. So he's a scribe of heaven. He's the architect of creation. So he's considered to be, by many, the highest angel in heaven. And he's the only angel and the only being in heaven that is allowed to sit besides the Creator itself, God. God is allowed to sit. Metatron is allowed to sit. No one else may sit. They all stand. And so, understanding what Metatron means, the figurative understanding that I take from that is that the architect of creation, the blueprint of creation, right, and sacred geometry is very connected with all this. That's beyond the physicality. That's the spiritual blueprint for everything. So it goes back to what I was talking about before. So, like when you're looking at, and I'll go ahead and tie this up in just a second, but when you look at trying to understand how all these different religions arrived at the specific ideas they did, you have to realize that they were many times people trying to find understanding and sort out what is going on here based on what they had available to them and the language they had available to them. And I think so very often, in so many cases, people are arguing over semantics. They're fighting over the particular way that these aspects of our existence have been described, instead of looking for the common ground. And it's okay that they're doing that, but I think they're missing the point as long as they do. And at a certain point, they may get to the point where they say, maybe I should start to look for common ground. And I believe as soon as they do, they'll find it. It's there. But I think that the ego, or the sense of self, boosts itself. It makes itself feel more grand, if it's able to argue a point and defeat another in an argument. It's something that is a lower brain kind of thing. It's a reptilian approach to life, if you will. I want to argue with this person and I want to win this argument. Winning arguments is not a way to understanding, but looking for common ground is. And so there's so much common ground between all the world's major faiths and minor faiths. It's just, so many people that want to fight over the way it's worded. So there's truth to be found everywhere, so I don't like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. And it actually really irritates me, as much as I'm irritated sometimes, and I kind of let it get to me that people want to fight over religion. It also bothers me when people want to throw religions under the bus, as a whole. And, I've got one good friend, for example, that she is vehemently anti-religion, and especially Christianity and Islam. But, any chance she has to try to throw people under the bus and laugh at them and talk about how stupid she thinks they are for having any beliefs, she takes that opportunity. And I mean, I know other people like that, but the point is, like, that's not helpful either. That's throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Obviously there's a lot that doesn't jive. There's a lot of fighting that goes on that shouldn't, but that doesn't mean that there is not any wisdom to be found when you start looking at these different world ideas. So yeah, I've kind of been all over the map, but so just one little more point I kind of touched on a little bit too. I feel like that our exploration of this dimension that we're in is what creates it. The rocks, the trees, the air, all the parts of creation, the stars, they all have consciousness, and they all play their part. And, you might say to yourself, well, what does a rock expect? What does a rock think? And, that's a good question. I mean, but I do firmly believe that a rock is not just a hunk of inanimate matter the way that most people would probably look at it. I believe that all these parts of our creation have a consciousness. They have a part to play in the creation, and it's a participatory creation. It's not, once again, something that we're at the mercy of some outside force. We are all doing this. We're in this together. And when you start looking at it that way, people tell me all the time, they're like, man, you're really chill. Like, how come you're so relaxed all the time? How come this isn't bothering you or upsetting you? Like, how are you able to deal with things and not let it throw you off so well? But I do really believe that my worldview is a huge part of that. When I first started looking at the world this way, within a few years of getting this much better, in my view, spiritual understanding, I lost my daughter. She died when she was 2.5 from a very rare genetic mutation that has been diagnosed less than 20 times in the world. And most people that have this mutation don't die from it. And, it's obviously a devastating thing. It's the hardest thing I've ever had to deal with in my life. And I don't really deal with it that well, honestly, but I deal with it much better than I would have before I learned all this, before I arrived at these ideas, because the old me, the me who I was before I started down this path of understanding, I don't think I would have been able to handle it. Honestly, think it would have destroyed me. And, I know in my heart of hearts that it's not even a faith thing. It's an understanding and a knowing that her life was meant to be the way it was. You know, as sad as it was, she is in a dimension now, in a place where everything is perfect. And so, you know, hindsight's 2020. So when we all get to that place, when we get to that dimension, we'll understand all of our shortcomings. We'll see the reason for every single thing. We will be as gods because we will understand the divine intention and how the Creator has worked in every moment, in everything. And so that's why, you know, I don't scoff too much at people who, you know, I don't agree with not taking medicine like Christian Scientists. They don't want to take any medicine, and they believe prayer can heal any problem in the body, and if it doesn't, then it's not meant to be healed. And while I'm not going to live that way, I can relate to it. I can relate to the idea that, you know, that this existence is something that is meant to happen the way it's happening, and to allow the will of the Creator to work through us, rather than, you know, thinking that that there's some, I don't know. I don't believe in any devil kind of thing. I don't believe in evil at all. Evil to me is like a figment of the imagination that people use to try to have something to blame for their lack of understanding and doing terrible things as a result of that lack of understanding. But I don't believe it's real. I believe that there's negativity, that there's negative entity. I can deal with that. But evil, like downright evil that's allowed to exist, is something that I just don't look at it that way. And, you know, maybe that's another matter of semantics. But, you know, I mean, we're all learning from each other, and that's the point. We got to learn from each other. We got to learn from the world around us. If you want to know God or the Creator, look around you, because everything came from the Creator, and the Creator works through us, and we are parts of the Creator. We're not separated. We're not at the mercy of the Creator. We are the vessels of the Creator. We are the emissaries of the Creator. And not just humans, right, but everything that exists. And the more you look at things this way, once again, back to the Native Americans, well, because they looked at things this way, all the animals were their brothers and sisters. The sky was a spirit to them. The rocks were spirits to them. That's something that I can agree with them on when they start getting on that wavelength, because nothing is your enemy. Sometimes it's your adversary in the temporary form, but it's not actually your enemy. We actually are all working together in one great act. I don't know if anybody's familiar with the Hermes Trismegistus or Tot, the Egyptian god Tot, but this is another parallel of Metatron, right? Because the Egyptian god Tot was the greatest worker of magic. So, you know, without getting too hung up on the word magic, but trying to look at the meaning behind it, some people believe that everything that's happening is all part of one greater happening, one greater magical working. We are all part of the great work. And what we're creating here through this shared magic, the shared power to create, is shared existence, right? And so a being like Metatron or Tot is an intermediary between the all force of everything and where we're at on the tree. And so, you know, I mean, these ideas are repeated over and over again, and you know, yeah, like Freemasons, okay, there's a lot of people that are in these organizations that use it for terrible purposes and do terrible things with the secrets they're able to keep. But a lot of the mystical symbolism and the ancient mysteries that feed into these secret societies have a lot of validity, and a lot of there's a book by Manly P. Hall called The Secret Teachings of All Ages, and that's something also I recommend to everyone, and that reinforces a lot of the things I'm talking about right now. There's a symbolism in everything, powerful symbolism in all things, and the more you recognize that symbolism and what it's trying to tell you and the meaning behind the symbolism, the better you'll recognize how it's all working through us and all of that. So anyway.
Well, thank you so much, Ralph. That was fantastic. And I don't think I need to ask any additional questions. But what I do want to do is open up an opportunity for the audience who's listening to ask a question or make a comment if they want to. And if not, I can certainly do so myself.
Will your views on spirituality be changed once disclosure occurs?
No, I don't know if I would say they're definitely going to change, but then at the same time, like, I've believed in aliens my whole life. I've never disbelieved in them. I'm definitely a person who's sympathetic to the notion that there's no way that the universe could be as vast as it is, and that there would be no other sentient life that has the ability to travel the stars. I mean, we want to do it someday, and you know, with the universe being several billion years old, then there's been plenty of time for other sentient beings to develop and to get technology to travel vast distances. So, you know, it's kind of a no-brainer to me that there's extraterrestrials, and it's kind of a no-brainer that many of them are going to be nefarious in their intents and purposes. And so I kind of apply the same logic to them. You know, I try to find forgiveness and understanding for those nefarious aspects, even for them. And so, you know, they don't realize what they do. They don't know what they're doing. They don't understand the consequences. And so, you know, when you get angry and you take an adversarial approach to these aspects that we're experiencing, I feel like you're missing an opportunity to grow in understanding, because you know, the easiest thing to do is react and say, that's my enemy, and you know, I hate them and I want them to suffer. It's more difficult to try to find a path to forgiveness and try to find a way that you can not condone their actions. You don't have to love what they do. Something my father always told me is that, you know, he would say, I love you, but I don't love everything you do. And that's powerful, right? You know, you can forgive the actions of individuals without condoning them. And so I think it's really empowering when you take that approach. And disclosure, I mean, you know, your average person, and this is going to sound really cynical when I say this, but your average person's not that smart. Your average person is really just kind of in a place where they're trying to get from day to day, make ends meet. They don't think about a lot of these really esoteric subjects and ideas, and so they're not ready probably for a lot of this information. So, you know, I mean, I'm not in favor of keeping all this shit under wraps. I think disclosure needs to go ahead and happen, but I can see why some people would think that it would cause chaos and you know, have motivations to keep things bottled up. So
Yeah, well, it's like so. I want to forgive the concept too, right? I would love to be able to, but it's kind of hard to forgive something that doesn't want to give up. You know, like if they want to. It seems the scenario they want to continue the dark side. I don't mean to hijack it about that, but these mystery schools and these people and a lot of spiritual leaders too are. I mean, even the Pope said he would baptize an alien and stuff like that. So there's a lot of the spiritual world leaders around the scenario. The I don't know what they saw in Antarctica, but they took the Russian Orthodox leader down there and and the Pope and other stuff. So like they're trying to figure out how to influence world leaders, you know, about the scenario so that they could tell their flock, as it were, which is going to affect the spiritual mind on Earth, but considerably.
Yeah, that's really interesting too about, you know, so I'll get on a little tangent too, and I know you'll appreciate this, but the Jesuit secret society within the Catholic Church is the source of what we know of as the Illuminati. Ingolstadt, which is in Bavaria, Germany, has a Jesuit university, which in 1770, I can't remember if it's 1775 or 1776, but on May 1st, one of those 2 years, the Bavarian Illuminati was formed by a man named Adam Weishaupt, who was a professor at that college that's now a university, Jesuit. And so I think that, you know, a lot of these nefarious actions and purposes are have that as a source. You know, some people talk about a black pope. Like the white pope is the public figurehead of the Catholic Church, and the black pope is the head of the Jesuit order, and they are the unseen, true force that's in charge of the Catholic Church. And when you start to look at all that, it helps to, you know, make sense out of why there's so much coming from Catholicism that seems to stray from a spiritual path.
Yeah, and it's weird because like there's some paperwork in the 1700s discussing how Masonry was kind of created by the Jesuits, and I feel it was in the regard because the Masonry concept, you just have to believe in a higher power, and they could get anybody from Buddhism to anything, any religion, into Masonry, and then feed that into the Catholic Church, you know, at a higher level. So I think it was kind of like a pyramid scheme in that regard. Masonry was able to be used for like anybody that wasn't, you know, full on Catholic, for example.
It's not the first time it's happened. From my perspective, when you have secret societies which have existed for thousands of years, there's going to be elements that co-opt them and use the ability to keep secrets for nefarious purposes. And I think that's a very powerful, strong, and successful from, you know, for them example. They've been very successful in co-opting these secret societies, but there is value in the things that the secret societies believe, in some of those things, many of those things, most of those things. But then they get co-opted by, you know, nefarious elements, and then the ones at the bottom of that pyramid are your average. I mean, my dad was a Freemason, but my dad was not a nefarious entity. My dad was a really fucking awesome person, and you know, they're putting their money and energy into these organizations without realizing what's going on at the top because they've been co-opted. So, yeah.
Well, I do believe the Bavarian Illuminati as well overthrew the Freemasons, and that caused, you know, there's actually reading the SSW Secret School of Wisdom, which shows out the basically the Freemasonry doctrine and their rituals and stuff like that, and the degrees. They actually added a Illuminatus degree, I do believe, within Freemasonry. It's actually a new degree because of the Bavarian Illuminati infiltrating the Freemasons, because the Freemasons during the time had a lot of political sway.
That's correct. Yeah. I mean, Albert Pike, you know, I mean, I've been studying this stuff for years and years, and so I'm kind of at a point in my life, and have been for a few years, where it's old news to me, right? But you know,
right.
Yeah, there's definitely there's a lot of snakes in that woodpile, and you know, I mean, the Bohemian Grove. I mean, I could go on all day, and I think you guys are kind of getting the gist when I say that. Like, I can wax about this stuff forever, but yeah, it's important, once again, not to throw the baby out with the bathwater. That's why I like Manly P. Hall's book, because he really is looking at all these different religions and ideas and teachings, and looking at them through a different lens, so you can understand, you know, what they were getting at. Because all the words we use, all the ideas that we talk about, they're really never what they are talking about. Words and terms and ideas are signposts that point their way to aspects of our creation. So like the word the word points to an aspect of our creation, which is speech, right? But I can describe it all day long. My description of it is not the thing. And so, and so when you start to look at language and communication this way and see that, then you can see how along the way so many people have become at odds with each other because they didn't like the other person's description of what they were describing.
Well, a lot of people use this too. Politicians use it, like they call it sophistry. They're complete sophists. So they use descriptive detail and stuff like that to I guess in a sense incorporate fallacy. Yeah, but it's the whole idea of don't confuse the map for the territory or the menu for the food. Like, my words are simply a sign or a symbol for the phenomenon per se.
Yeah, and that's something else that the Power of Now book that I referenced earlier, the Eckhart Tolle book, it talks about that too. And that was my first introduction to the concept that words and ideas, that whole thing. So, but yeah, it's really interesting to try to apply that.
Ralph, I just wanted to thank you so much, man. You really touched me deeply, man, and you reminded me a lot of things that I learned a long time ago, and I had forgotten about it. And it was just it was really like a pleasure and an honor listening to you talk about this stuff and reminding me. And I really wanted to thank you a whole bunch. Appreciate it.
I couldn't agree more. I feel the same way, and I feel like that's a really strong and appropriate note to probably close on, although we could definitely continue as long as you guys want. But Ralph's a special soul, and I feel like he and I have a lot in common, and he's got a deep perspective on shit. So we'll have to make this part of a series where we'll get into some things a little bit more. Ralph, is there anything else you wanted to get out there to anybody who might listen to this podcast on YouTube, BitChute, or Podcast Addict, or Podbean?
Well, John, thank you for those kind words. That means a lot, and I really appreciate you saying that. You too, Shogun. I love this server, man. I love you guys. I'm really glad that Shogun made it. Because if it wasn't for him making it in the first place, I wouldn't have made friends with all of you guys in the first place. This is a tough time in my life right now. Like I said, I'm recently separated and going through a divorce and been kind of lonely, and it's not a matter of that I don't have friends. I've got friends, and but you guys have been really good to me, and you've let me be good to you. And, like Bill and Ted, be excellent to each other. I mean, that's pretty good. If you only had one commandment, that'd be a pretty good commandment. So, it's been excellent being here. One of the best experiences of my life, being able to make friends with you guys and share with you guys and laugh and cry and everything else along with you guys. So I love all you guys, and and make sure each one of you, man, don't ever forget to love yourself and forgive yourself, because that's as important as forgiving anyone else, if not more important. We all make mistakes, and we're all in this together. So just let the love grow, man. Water it all you can, tend it all you can. Give it all the light and fertilizer you can, man. Just foster that in everything you do, and you will benefit from it. Your life will be fulfilling if you approach it that way. I can promise you that.
Well, Ralph, I just want to say that what you said touched my heart. Honestly, I could feel the cracks in my fucking stony heart fucking opening up, honestly, for real. And the beautiful thing is this podcast will reach hundreds of people who will be exposed to the wisdom and the compassion of Ralph. And thank you all so much for being part of this. Is there anyone who has a pressing, feeling they need to ask or say something before we close? All right. Well, thank you so much, Ralph, for your time. Thank you, everybody, for attending the live audience. This will be uploaded on BitChute at YouTube and the RT podcast channel of the server, which is, of course, the Roundtable Discord server. Ralph, anytime you want to do another episode, just hit up my DMs. We'll set it up. And I think tomorrow we're going to do probably the episode on Catholicism, but it may be the episode on Peg Tyler 2020. Stay tuned for that. Either way, it'll happen at 8 p.m. CT. That being said, let's jump up to one of the other roundtable rooms, and I'll see you back here tomorrow, same time.